and with the permission of the chair, I quickly start my presentation. There are certain slides and it's a bit old data, but deliberately I have done this because I have taken data for a specific period where, in this period, when India grew very fast. No, I'll not. Thank you. So, and I'll tell actually a parable. For that, I need some data. I'll quickly pass through that. Rather, I'll tell you a story, and then if time permits, I go for some prescriptions. And as it's clear that I'll be focusing on the informal sector of India. And we know it's very large, and it is a bit old, 2013 ILO data, and it shows that if you take all these different continents and together, then it's huge. And though today I'll be focusing on the informal sector, so far as non-agricultural employment is concerned. So this is the context, it's very large. But not only that, if we look at this data, we see that basically over time, in a period when India grew very fast, the size of the informal sector, consisting of manufacturing as well as largely services, petty services, the size of it in terms of employment also increased by a large amount. And agriculture, people are moving out of agriculture and basically moving into, as Professor Nagaraj was telling us, basically moving into this informal sector, and the others that also actually considers or includes a lot of informal sector activities which is not included in the third column, like construction, etc. So basically there is a kind of, people say that the mainstream, that there is a transition going on, people going out of agriculture. If you look at the absolute values, of course, then people are coming out of agriculture and moving into informal sector. But there is a very large debate that its population might be a very important reason for that. That population explosion is an important reason for this ballooning of the informal sector. This is a very important kind of discourse. But for that, I'm not going into the details. Here I'm trying to show something where we see that if we arrange the Indian states in terms of per capita income, this is very important actually, this story, that we find that the size of the informal sector as a share of population in terms of employment, so as a share of population is increasing over time. So it's not that there are certain pockets where informal sector is expanding. It is important that with expansion of the economy, increasing per capita income, very strikingly, we find that if we arrange the states, we find that the share of informal sector is larger as we move from lower per capita income to higher per capita income. So curiously, we see that the volume of informality is expanding in tandem with the so-called progress. So it's very peculiar, contrary if we look at that old Lewisian kind of discourse where we have had a kind of idea of transformation, traditional economy becoming modern, something else is happening. We have growth, and deliberately we are taking data for that period when India grew very fast. Deliberately. We could have data, recent data also, but this is very striking. In this period, India grew very fast, and there is a kind of informalization, and that is not only coming out of the formal sector, people are moving out of agriculture and moving into informal sector. Now this question might come that it is just Harris-Stoddard, nothing else. So it's not very curious, it's not very surprising or strange. It's Harris-Stoddard kind of phenomenon. May not be so. So actually the next table is just the tip of the iceberg. We have calculated in different publications, and we are doing also at this moment, dividing informal sector in terms of number of people, size of the farm, etc., etc. The story is same. So this is very interesting actually. During this period, we find that consistently, almost throughout the period, informal sector's labor productivity, this is labor productivity values, these are just at 2017-18 prices. What we find is this, that informal sector, taking together even the larger informal units, there are 14% we know, So clubbing them together, I'll come to that story. Clubbing them together, the larger ones and the petty ones, the self-employed, manufacturing and services, if you club them, very interestingly, partial labor productivity is even below agriculture. People might say agriculture is combining different types of land sizes. Informal sector is also combining a variety of farm sizes. We forget that because in our mind we have only simple one person with thala. This is not informal sector, and it's a variety of sizes. And we have done this in our work, and we have checked that if you have one-to-one, like very small agriculture and then very small informal, then a bit larger and a bit larger informal unit, similar kind of dichotomy is there. Consistently, informal sector's labor productivity is less. So it's not just Harris Todaro. Story comes here, starts here. So what is happening? Progress, so-called progress. We are growing, there is a growth, and of course that is accumulative growth, capital-induced growth, capital-centric growth, Lewisian kind of growth. But instead of eradication or mitigation of dualism, we are having a kind of dualism being recreated. So it's creation of dualism instead of mitigation of dualism. That is the story I try to say today. And what is happening here, if we break down informal sector, this third column, you'd find that a part of informal sector, roughly around 15%, is actually better than agriculture, and the other part is horrible. Although even the standard of agriculture is very bad, 10,000 rupees, 15,000 rupees per month, or combining the largest of agriculture also. So, I'm sorry. So, what is happening here is this kind of progress is taking place. People are pushed out of agriculture. Why? We will come to that parable. People are pushed out of maybe agriculture, and then a small part may be going to the better of informal units. A very large part is being pushed out to the worst, this inferior outcome. Because when you have, the logic is that, rational choice, that when you are moving out to an inferior option, it should not be termed as a pull-driven outcome or something like that. So a part may be going to the skilled ones, the networked ones, the asset-rich ones, and having access to financial institutions, etc. They might be going up, and the other very large part is going down. So, in fact, if we look at it, it's horrible. If you look at post-liberalization manufacturing, urban, you'd find that labor productivity is actually, labor productivity is actually falling in different states. In many states in post-liberalization period, actually labor productivity in urban manufacturing, unorganized manufacturing, it is falling. So similar is the case for, the earlier one was self-employment based urban manufacturing, that is the pettiest ones. And this is for self-employment based services where the similar thing is happening. So what is happening here? Once again, there is some kind of pressure from agriculture. People are coming out. A smaller part is able to climb up. A very large part is going to the inferior option. That is the worst part of the informal sector, which is huge. So a creation of dualism is clear instead of mitigation of dualism. So given this, I'm trying to tell a parable. It is just a parable that there is this capitalistic sector and the modern informal, which we call it a modern informal sector. And there is a modern use of resources. Resources can be, I'm dividing like this, and the petty informal sector. So when there is a capitalistic expansion, actually I am using the concept of accumulation by disposition of David Harvey, where this accumulation is taking place and the resources are being extracted from the traditional resources, traditional sector, maybe traditional agriculture or traditional use of resources. So people are being pushed out. Only a few are able to go to the modern informal sector or the advanced informal sector, which are actually linked with the modern sector. But a very large part, and there is a kind of evolution, you may say, which we see in urban better off areas. But there is kind of evolution maybe, but a very large part is being pushed to to the traditional informal sector. So it's a kind of dualism which is being created within the informal sector also. It's not only formal and informal, but within the informal sector also. How much time do I have? 2 minutes, 3 minutes? So growth has been largely non-inclusive. And more importantly, we have a kind of creation of dualism. That is what I'm trying to harp on. Now, in this context, we had COVID. And now, so in the context of COVID, once again, we are looking at the modern industry, modern growth process to pull up the informal sector. But once we have seen, that is my actually understanding, that if growth, that modern sector-based growth, Lewisian growth cannot resolve the problem, how can we rely once again on that kind of path? So we have to think about something else. And the immediate exigency, even today, even if COVID has moved out biologically maybe, so my take is that unconditional cash transfer, even today, despite a lot of debate on this, is feasible and important for this sector because of a very important character of informal units. Because this is very important. This one, I'm sorry. Contrary to cash transfers to the industrial workers who are solely consumers and to the large entrepreneurs who are mainly producers, cash injection towards the petty farm and non-farm informal petty production boosts up both consumption and production. As demand and supply are relaxed, we have non-inflationary expansion. This is because of the uniqueness of petty commodity production, which is unlike capitalistic production, which has been dealt with way back in theories of surplus value, and then in 1999 by Lenin on the question of home market, that this is because of the uniqueness of petty commodity production having unity between consumption and production. So if you give cash to the informal units, both production, both supply and demand are boosted. This is missed out in the general mainstream discussions. We generally immediately start fearing about inflation, etc. So, and the long run strategy, with this I'll stop. This is basically, I'm trying to say, to propose cluster-based industrialization in the long run for the informal units, informal sector. And we know clusters enjoy synergic and also scale effects via sharing of tangible and intangible resources, collective capture of markets, despite being governed by the principles of private ownership. And hence, clusters could offer the tiny enterprises an edge in handling their conflicts and complementarities with global capital. Now, this might seem an utopia. And exactly with this, I'll stop that. And exactly because of this apprehension, life, livelihood, and dignity of labor have to be secured, not only because it is a basic responsibility of the state, but more importantly, it is a moral and natural right of the toiling multitude. And we have seen during COVID that even in 2020, the world is run by labor. We have seen this through the series of lockdowns. However, if state fails, this is the difference actually. These issues should be taken up as a crucial political agenda by the working class. It is not usually there in the left discourse, because this is different. It's a kind of creation of some alternative within the old society. So with this, thank you.